Hello there, Commonwealth Realm here. The E3 2021 Nintendo Direct sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild teaser was an eye-opener beyond my wildest expectations. Through this video, we will share to you how it is all part of one big, over a decade-long plan to turn the Zelda franchise into something greater, both from a story and gameplay perspective, including the sky and floating islands which only confirmed a previous belief of mine. It is all an untraditional trilogy that ties back to Skyward Sword. Story and gameplay in the sky coming on top of the altered surface that we know and love from Breath of the Wild, and which will together offer new exploration value. But what about the underground, where the game likely begins and where we also see Link fighting? It is likely another layer of Hyrule, which has been built towards over 2 prior 3D Zelda games for this specific moment. The culmination of an invisible trilogy? Well, then join me as I will show you both through Zelda lore and gameplay possibilities why the sequel will expand from having one layer, the surface in Breath of the Wild, to 3 in the sequel, sky, surface, and underground, thus allowing the player to explore the secrets of every imaginable section of Hyrule without leaving the planet itself for space. The underground. A story of resurrections in the last 3 3D Zelda games in the sky, on the surface, and underground, where in the sequel, both Ganondorf and Link rise up from the underground, while Princess Zelda might have remained there waiting for Link to return. No doubt, the underground is the source of troubles in Zelda, as clearly indicated by the first battle in the Zelda timeline, or more specifically, Skyward Sword's prologue tale of the ancient battle against Demise and his army which, quote, "One dark fateful day, the earth cracked wide, and malevolent forces rushed forth from the fissure. They mounted a brutal assault on the surface people, driving the land into deep despair." A malevolent force unleashing an attack from underground the surface. Sounds familiar, and by all means it also makes complete sense, as the forces of evil, both in Christian and ancient Shinto tradition, tied to demons deep underground. A part of the Trinity and the eternal battle between good and evil on the battleground, the surface. In Breath of the Wild sequel, we see that the force of good faces defeat against the malevolent force underground, which rushed up from the fissure with Hyrule Castle, leaving Link to fight his way out from the Ganondorf's demon realm, or realm of evil, hatred, and malice, back to the surface, the layer of the mortals. At the same time, Link is aware that a return to the underground is inevitable, as this is where he might have lost the Master Sword and his precious Zelda, both that he can't reach before growing strong. First on the surface, the empty and ruined surface of Hyrule. Much like in Skyward Sword, deprived of human life in its center, and in Breath of the Wild sequel, it is once again occupied by Ganondorf's minions, preventing a successful restoration following the victory against the Calamity in Breath of the Wild. Just like in Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword, the surface is the past and future battleground, where the forces of the 3 layers will eventually duke it out. Here, among the mortals, are all our necessities to survive, but also thanks to our new arm, the portals to not only remain in the realm of the living and its ancient and current wisdom, but also reach for the skies above and the divide land of a possible new tribe as suggested by Nintendo Black Crisis on the floating islands above Hyrule. You may have already noticed it, but we started underground where the former wielder of the Triforce of Power is found. We then make our way up to the surface where the past holders of the Triforce of Wisdom ruled through the divine and royal blood. From here, we will head up to the sky into the realm of immortal spirits, including the spirit of the hero, the wielder of the Triforce of Courage. It all ties to the holy trinity of the world of Hyrule, and the division of this one into 3 layers: underground of power and foundation, surface of wisdom and the rule of time, and the sky of courage and spirits. Din, Nehru, and Furore, the 3 golden goddesses who created the Triforce and then handed it to the surface deity, Goddess Hylia, for safekeeping, until she was forced to send it up to the sky when the malevolent forces from the fissure surged forth from the underground and on the surface. Quote from Skyward Sword's prologue: "To prevent this great power from falling into the hands of evil swarming the lands, the goddess gathered the surviving humans on an outcropping of earth. She sent it skyward, beyond the reach of the demonic hordes, beyond even the clouds." Which brings us to the sky, where we are returning to where it all began in Skyward Sword, in Breath of the Wild sequel, likely thanks to Link's new arm and companion, where additional trials await to become the true hero Hyrule needs to overcome the threat of the resurrected Ganondorf. It is all poetic, and is intended by the person who changed everything by joining the Zelda team after directing the Capcom Zelda games and then directing the 3 most recent 3D Zelda games in a row: Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and its sequel aimed for a 2022 release. Zelda director Hidemaru Fujibayashi, series producer Eiji Aonuma's storywriting and world-building genius who wrote the entire story of Skyward Sword, introduced us to the sky world of that game and then connected the story to Breath of the Wild's surface and now its sequels Underground and once again Sky. And it is all summed up in the few lines from the prologue to the first 3D Zelda game he directed at Nintendo and the first placed in the Zelda timeline. All that are lines that he personally wrote. A short 3-minute or so prologue that highlights the importance of all 3 layers of Hyrule. The sky, which in Breath of the Wild 2 is clearly inspired and expanded from Skyward Sword, which again was possibly an expansion of its original source of inspiration. Twilight Princess, the City in the Sky dungeon, one of the largest Zelda temples of all time, from a game that Fujibayashi-san did not work on, but which he took inspiration from to turn one of the most unique Zelda dungeons in the series into an entire overworld and main base in Skyward Sword. The sky with its floating islands and the main floating island of Skyloft, the starting location of Skyward Sword from where we headed down to the future surface of Hyrule where Breath of the Wild started and down to the underground where Breath of the Wild sequel will by all indications begin, as we are granted control upon Link's awakening with his new ancient arm. Just think of it, a story that takes place before the founding of Hyrule and its kingdom, then a story that we play after the downfall of said kingdom and land, and a sequel that takes place in an attempt to resurrect the land for a quest underground, on its surface, and in the sky. And what beyond this is common to the 3 different starting locations of Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and its sequel? Namely that it is here, on the main floating island of the sky, the opening location of the surface, and the opening location on the ground, that we obtained the main tool of each game. The Goddess Sword, which is later on forged into the Master Sword, the Sheikah Slate, which is upgraded throughout the game and crucial to mastering the surface and unlocking the true ending of the game, and this new hand of ancient origin, which will take us from hell through the surface up to the heaven, while also manipulating time and reversing it for certain objects and projectiles. Fujibayashi's complete story of sky, surface, and underground, his Triforce trilogy of connected 3D Zelda games, but where only the final 3rd game will take place in all 3 layers of this very spread out trilogy: underground, surface, and then sky. All need to be conquered to challenge Ganondorf to a decisive duel over the curse that was established in the first Zelda game in the timeline, and the first in director and writer Hidemaru Fujibayashi's trilogy of Zelda games. At first, from the underground we'll have to escape, but after conquering the surface and then the sky, the time will arrive to return back first to the surface and then underground to go far deeper into the dangerous depths of Hyrule and storm it to reunite with Princess Zelda. Back to the surface and then charge perhaps from the sky, Hyrule. No, scratch that. Ganon's castle. A struggle that will bring us back to the decisive battles in the first game of this saga, Skyward Sword, and bring the eternal story of underground, surface, and sky to its ultimate resolution. A world that will both be connected and disconnected, non-linear and linear, combining everything that we know and love when it comes to Zelda's storytelling and gameplay of both old and new. The sequel, which with its changed surface and expanded world through the underground and the sky islands, will put Breath of the Wild to shame and show the true power of the Zelda franchise when the Zelda team is not holding back any areas like the underwater, underground, or sky, but give us the players it all. A multi-layered world to explore, grow in, and at the end of the game, stand triumphant in, where all the trinities come together into one to conclude an over-decade-long arc of the hatred of the demon, the blood of the goddess, and the spirit of the hero, and over 5 years of Breath of the Wild brilliance on the Nintendo Switch. The ultimate Zelda, where Skyward Sword was the alpha of this trilogy, while Breath of the Wild sequel is the omega, the first and the last in the traditional Zelda timeline, with Breath of the Wild serving as a prologue to the omega. If you enjoyed this dive into the deep logic of free gameplay layers and the possibilities presented by these, far beyond possible trials and dungeons, then be sure to leave a like, subscribe and press that notification bell. Finally, a big thanks goes to all patreon.com/Common Realm patrons, and in particular to royal producer Charles Shash. You rock, and please enjoy one or both of these two awesome videos.